Hell's Angel found a little girl sleeping on trash on Christmas Eve. The truth stunned him. The bitter December wind howled through the narrow alley, whipping at Rico's leather jacket. Christmas lights from the main street cast faint, colorful shadows that danced across the brick walls, a mockery of holiday cheer. He took another swig from his flask, welcoming the familiar burn of whiskey down his throat. Empty storefronts lined both sides of the alley, their windows dark and uninviting. The sound of distant carol singers drifted on the wind, making Rico's chest tighten with memories he'd rather forget. His heavy boots crunched on scattered bits of broken glass and frozen puddles as he made his way deeper into the shadows. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. 10 years. 10 years since he'd lost everything that mattered. His wife Sarah, their unborn child. All gone in a single night of twisted metal and screeching tires. The memories hit harder during the holidays, when every storefront and street corner seemed determined to remind him of what family meant, and what he no longer had. Rico pulled his collar up against the cold, his fingers brushing against the rough stubble of his beard. The tattoos on his arms, visible even through his jacket sleeves, told stories of his past life. The military, the Hell's Angels, the years spent trying to outrun his grief. But no matter how far or fast he ran, the holidays always caught up with him. His flask was almost empty now. The whiskey wasn't helping like it used to. Nothing did anymore. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly before him, each step taking him nowhere. Christmas Eve in the city, a time when families gathered around dinner tables and decorated trees. Rico had neither. Just these dark alleys and his memories for company. A rat scurried across his path, disappearing behind a dumpster. The smell of rotting garbage and wet cardboard filled his nostrils. Rico's head was starting to swim from the whiskey, but he welcomed the numbness. Anything was better than feeling the full weight of this night. He was about to take another drink when something caught his eye. Movement among a pile of discarded cardboard boxes and trash bags. At first he thought it was another rat. But there was something different about this shape, something that made him stop in his tracks. Rico squinted through the dim light. The shape was too big for a rat, too small for an adult. His combat-trained instincts kicked in, pushing through the alcohol haze. He moved closer, his footsteps now deliberate and careful on the frozen ground. The pile of trash shifted slightly. Rico could make out what looked like a small shoe poking out from beneath a soggy cardboard box. His heart began to pound. This wasn't right. This couldn't be what it looked like. He took another step forward, and that's when he saw her. A little girl, curled up tight against the cold, half buried under the pile of garbage. Her clothes were thin and dirty, her dark hair matted against her face. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Rico's hands began to shake, and it had nothing to do with the whiskey. The flask slipped from his fingers, clattering against the ground. The sound seemed to echo off the alley walls. The little girl stirred at the noise. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a gaze that pierced straight through Rico's hardened exterior. Those eyes, wide and frightened yet somehow hopeful, met his own. In that moment, all the whiskey in the world couldn't numb what he felt. Rico took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The whiskey's effects seemed to evaporate in an instant, replaced by a sharp clarity he hadn't felt in years. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements gentle and deliberate, like approaching a wounded animal. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, surprised by the tenderness in his own voice. "Are you hurt?" The girl pulled her knees tighter to her chest, her thin jacket offering little protection against the December chill. Up close, Rico could see her clothes were worn and dirty, her sneakers falling apart at the seams. Dark smudges on her cheeks could have been dirt or tears. Probably both. "I'm not going to hurt you," Rico assured her, keeping his distance but close enough to block some of the bitter wind. Despite his massive frame and rough appearance, he tried to make himself look less threatening. He hunched his shoulders and kept his hands where she could see them. The girl's teeth chattered as she studied his face. Her eyes moved from his beard to his tattoos, then back to his eyes. Something in her expression changed. A flash of recognition, or maybe just desperate hope. "Are you—" Her voice came out barely above a whisper, trembling with cold and uncertainty. "Are you my daddy?" The question hit Rico like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. His mind raced through fragments of his past, searching for any possibility, any connection. But there was nothing. Just the ghost of what could have been if that night 10 years ago had ended differently. The girl's lips quivered, and she asked again, her voice smaller this time, "Daddy?" Rico's heart clenched in his chest. He knew he should correct her, tell her no, but the words stuck in his throat. She looked so small, so vulnerable against the pile of trash and cardboard. The temperature was dropping by the minute, and her lips were starting to turn blue. Without thinking, Rico shrugged off his leather jacket. The cold bit through his t-shirt, but he barely noticed. Moving slowly, telegraphing his intentions, he reached toward her. "Come here, sweetheart," he said, his gruff voice gentler than it had been in years. "Let's get you warm." The girl didn't hesitate. She practically launched herself into his arms, her tiny fingers clutching at his shirt. She was lighter than she should be, Rico realized, and she was shaking, violently from the cold. He wrapped his jacket around her small frame, careful not to frighten her with any sudden movements. The leather jacket swallowed her whole, making her look even tinier than before. She pressed her face against his chest, seeking warmth. Rico's mind was already mapping out the quickest route to the police station 6 blocks away. He cradled her carefully, one arm supporting her back, the other under her legs. His heart hammered against his ribs as he felt her small hands grip his shirt tighter. "I've got you," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I've got you." He turned toward the street, his protective instincts taking over. The girl's question echoed in his mind. "Are you my daddy?" As he started walking briskly towards the police station, each step purposeful and sure. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Rico pushed through the glass doors, still cradling the small girl in his leather jacket. The warmth of the building hit them both, making the girl's shivering more pronounced as her body began to thaw. Behind the front desk, Officer Martinez looked up from her paperwork, her eyes widening at the sight of the hulking, tattooed man holding a child. She quickly pressed a button under her desk, and within seconds, 2 more officers emerged from a back room. "She needs help," Rico said, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Found her in an alley off Wilson Street. She's freezing." Officer Martinez came around the desk while her colleagues approached cautiously. "Sir, could you please set her down?" The girl's fingers dug deeper into Rico's shirt. "No," she whimpered, pressing her face against his chest. "It's okay," Rico murmured, surprising himself with how natural the words felt. "These people are here to help you. They're the good guys." Officer Martinez smiled gently at the girl. "Hi there, sweetie, I'm Sarah. Can you tell me your name?" The girl peeked, out from Rico's chest, her voice barely audible. "Mia." Recognition flashed across Officer Martinez's face. She exchanged quick glances with her colleagues, and Rico didn't miss the silent communication passing between them. "Mia?" Officer Martinez repeated softly. "We've been looking for you, honey. Would you like some hot chocolate? We have some in the break room." Rico felt Mia's grip loosen slightly at the mention of hot chocolate. He set her down carefully, but she kept hold of his jacket, wrapping it tighter around herself. "Will you stay?" Mia asked, looking up at Rico with those same trusting eyes that had pierced his heart in the alley. Before Rico could answer, Officer Martinez stepped in. "Officer Thompson here will take you to get that hot chocolate, Mia. We just need to talk to—" She paused, looking at Rico questioningly. "Rico," he supplied. "We need to talk to Rico for a minute, okay?" Mia reluctantly let Officer Thompson lead her away, still wearing Rico's oversized jacket. As soon as she was out of earshot, Officer Martinez's friendly demeanor shifted to something more serious. "That's Mia Stevens," she said, leading Rico to a quiet corner of the lobby. "She's been in and out of the system for years. Her mother's a known drug addict in the area." Rico's stomach churned. "She asked if I was her daddy," he admitted, running a hand through his beard. Officer Martinez nodded grimly. "She's been abandoned 3 times this year alone. Every time her mother gets clean, she takes Mia back, makes promises. Then she relapses and Mia ends up—" She gestured vaguely, leaving the sentence unfinished. "In alleys," Rico finished, feeling sick. "We've been looking for her since yesterday morning. Her mother was supposed to pick her up from her latest foster home, but never showed." Officer Martinez sighed. "The foster system is overwhelmed, especially during the holidays." Rico's mind raced back to the hope in Mia's eyes when she'd asked if he was her father, the trust she'd shown him. A complete stranger. His chest tightened with a mixture of guilt and confusion. Here was a little girl so desperate for a father that she'd latch on to anyone, even someone like him, an ex-gang member with more demons than he could count. "She has no other family?" he asked. "None that we've found," Officer Martinez replied. "And believe me, we've looked." Through the window of a nearby room, Rico could see Mia sitting at a table, his leather jacket still draped around her small shoulders, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. She looked so small, so alone. Officer Martinez returned with a clipboard and some forms. She sat across from Rico, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Rico, I need to ask you something directly. Is there any possibility you could be Mia's biological father?" Rico shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I don't know. My life wasn't exactly stable back then." Another officer approached with a manila folder. "Sarah, you need to see this." He handed her some papers, and her eyebrows rose as she read. "According to these records," Officer Martinez said slowly, "Mia's mother wrote something interesting in her journal during one of her rehab stays. She described Mia's father as someone with a big heart, a protector, a man who wears his scars like armor." She looked pointedly at the tattoos visible on Rico's forearms, some covering old scars. Rico's heart thundered in his chest. He thought back to his years with the hellsangels, the countless cities, the endless parties. Could it be possible? "We can arrange a DNA test," Officer Martinez suggested gently. "Given the circumstances and Mia's immediate attachment to you, it might be worth checking." Rico watched through the window as Mia sipped her hot chocolate, still drowning in his leather jacket. Something about her pulled at him, a feeling he couldn't explain or ignore. "How long would the test take?" he asked. "We can do a rush order given the situation. Results would be back in 48 hours. Officer Martinez leaned forward. "In the meantime, we need to place Mia somewhere safe." Rico rubbed his face, feeling the rough scratch of his beard. "What are her options?" Emergency foster care, but during the holidays. Officer Martinez trailed off. Most homes are full. She'd likely end up in a group home until after New Year's. Rico thought about Mia spending Christmas in a group home, surrounded by strangers. The idea made his chest ache. What if, he started, then stopped, surprised by what he was about to suggest. What if she stayed with me, just until the results come back? Officer Martinez studied him carefully. We'd need to do a background check. You'll find things, Rico admitted. I was in the Hells Angels, but I've been clean for years. Honorable discharge from the military before that. To his surprise, Officer Martinez nodded. I'll make some calls. We'll need to inspect your home, but given the, circumstances... She glanced at Mia through the window. Sometimes the system needs to be flexible. An hour later, after paperwork and preliminary checks, Rico sat in the waiting room while officers prepared the final documents. Mia sat beside him, still wrapped in his jacket, her small feet dangling off the chair. Are you going to leave me too? She asked suddenly, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. Rico turned to look at her, seeing the fear and hope battling in her eyes. This little girl had been abandoned so many times, yet somehow still found the courage to trust again. Her question hit him like a physical blow, stirring something deep inside him that he thought had died years ago. No, Mia, he said firmly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. I'm not going to leave you. She studied his face carefully, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Rico had made many promises in his life, broken most of them, but this one felt different. This one he intended to keep. Rico sat on the edge of the motel bed, the springs creaking under his weight. The room's dim lamp cast long shadows across the worn carpet. On the other bed, Mia slept peacefully, still wrapped in his leather jacket despite the room's warmth. Her small chest rose and fell with each breath, and Rico couldn't help but marvel at how quickly she'd trusted him. He pulled out his phone, its blue light harsh in the darkness. His rough fingers, more used to handling motorcycle parts than touchscreens, typed carefully, Sandra Mitchell addiction. He remembered the name from the police report, and his heart raced as he pressed search. The first result was from the local newspaper, dated 3 years ago. Local mother struggles with recovery, loses custody. Rico's throat tightened as he read. The article painted a painful picture of Sandra Mitchell's life, multiple failed rehab attempts, a string of abusive relationships, and a daughter who kept being placed in foster care. Sandra always dreamed of being a good mother, one quote read, but the demons were too strong. Rico knew about demons. He'd fought his own for years. He scrolled further, finding older articles. One showed a picture of Sandra, younger, healthier, with the same wide eyes as Mia. She was standing outside a rehab facility, hope still visible on her face. The caption mentioned her 5th attempt at getting clean. Rico's fingers trembled as he clicked another link. This one led to a community blog, where Sandra had apparently written during one of her recovery periods. Most entries were short, desperate attempts at maintaining hope, but one entry, dated shortly after Mia's birth, made Rico's blood run cold. My baby deserves better than this, Sandra had written. Better than a mother who can't stay clean. Better than the endless parade of men who promise to save us but only bring more pain. Sometimes I think about her real father, not the monster who came after, but the man with scars, on his heart. The one who protected me for those few precious weeks before his own demons drove him away. He wore his pain like armor, but underneath was a gentleness I've never found again. I wonder if he even knows he has a daughter. Rico's phone slipped from his fingers, landing softly on the carpet. He remembered that summer, 8 years ago. He'd just left the Hells Angels, trying to piece his life back together. There had been a woman, beautiful, broken, trying to stay clean. He'd protected her from an abusive ex, given her shelter for a few weeks. But when his old gang started causing trouble, he'd disappeared to keep her safe. Sandra Mitchell. The name had meant nothing to him earlier today. Now it echoed in his mind like a bell. He looked at Mia again, studying her features in the dim light. The shape of her nose, the set of her jaw, they were his. How had he not seen it immediately? His heart pounded as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed started falling into place. A man with scars on his heart. Sandra's words haunted him. The description fit him perfectly. The physical scars from his gang days, the emotional ones from losing his way, the armor he'd built around himself to keep the world at bay. The DNA test results wouldn't come for another day, but Rico already knew what they would say. The truth was, right there in Mia's sleeping face, in Sandra's words, in the way his heart had recognized her before his mind could catch up. The motel room glowed with pale winter light as Rico opened his eyes. Christmas morning. He'd almost forgotten what day it was. His phone showed 7:13 a.m., and there were no messages from the police department. No updates about Sandra, no DNA test results yet. A soft rustling caught his attention. Mia sat cross-legged on her bed, still wearing his oversized leather jacket, her small fingers tracing the worn patches and studs. She looked up at him with those familiar eyes, Sandra's eyes, and managed a tiny smile. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, as if afraid to break the morning quiet. Rico cleared his throat. "Merry Christmas, kid." The words felt strange in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd said them to anyone. He checked his phone again, scrolling through his notifications. Nothing. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Where was Sandra? Was she looking for Mia? Did she even know her daughter had spent the night in a motel with a stranger who might be her father? "Do you think Santa knew where to find me?" Mia's voice was so small, so hopeful, it made Rico's chest ache. Rico ran a hand through his beard, buying time to think. He looked around the sparse motel room, feeling helpless. No tree, no presents, nothing that resembled Christmas. But then he remembered something. He reached for his duffel bag and pulled out a chocolate bar he'd bought at a gas station yesterday. "Look what I found," he said, holding it out to her. Mia's face lit up as if he'd handed her gold. She took the chocolate carefully, like it might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Thank you," she said, breaking it in half and offering him a piece. Rico's phone buzzed, making them both jump. His heart raced as he checked the screen, but it was just a holiday message from his old military buddy. He sighed, running his hands over his face. "Are you trying to find my mom?" Mia asked suddenly, her voice trembling slightly. Rico looked at her, seeing the worry in her young face. "The police are looking for her," he said honestly. "They'll let us know when they find her." Mia nodded, clutching the chocolate bar tighter. "Sometimes she disappears," she said matter-of-factly. "But she always comes back, usually." The resignation in her voice hit Rico like a punch to the gut. No kid should sound that used to abandonment. His phone rang again, and this time it was the police station's number. Rico's hand shook slightly as he answered. "Hello?" Mia watched him intently as he listened too, the officer on the other end. Rico's face must have given something away because her eyes went wide with fear. "We found Sandra Mitchell," the officer was saying. "She's been taken to Memorial Hospital. She was found unconscious in Carter Park, showing signs of an overdose. We're still waiting for more information." Rico's throat went dry. "Is she..." She's alive, but critical. We thought you should know, given the situation with her daughter. Rico ended the call and found Mia standing right in front of him, her small hands clutching his arm. "Was that about my mom?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Is she okay?" Rico looked down at this little girl who'd stumbled into his life just yesterday. This child who might be his daughter, who was now clinging to him like he was her only lifeline. "Your mom's sick," he said gently. "She's in the hospital, but the doctors are helping her." "Is she going to die?" Mia's lip quivered, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "They're doing everything they can for her," Rico said, and without thinking, he pulled her into his arms as she began to sob. The hospital corridors felt endless as Rico walked toward the ICU, his heavy boots squeaking against the polished floor. The sterile smell of disinfectant burned his nostrils, bringing back memories of his own hospital stays after getting hurt in the service. He'd left Mia with a kind-faced social worker in the waiting room. The girl had clung to his jacket, not wanting to let go, but he knew she shouldn't see her mother like this. Room 412. Rico paused at the doorway, his hand gripping the frame. Sandra Mitchell lay still in the hospital bed, tubes snaking from her arms, the steady beep of machines marking time. Her face was gaunt, her skin sallow. She looked nothing like the woman in the old newspaper photo he'd found online. "Are you family?" A nurse appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. Rico cleared his throat. I might be. I found her daughter last night." He struggled to find the right words. "There's a chance I'm the father." The nurse's expression softened. "The doctor will be here shortly, but I should warn you, it doesn't look good. The overdose caused severe organ damage." Rico nodded, his jaw tight. He stepped into the room, pulling up a chair beside Sandra's bed. Up close, he could see faint traces of Mia in her face, the curve of her cheekbones, the shape of her nose. A doctor appeared in the doorway. "Martinez. Rico Martinez." "Mr. Martinez, I'm Dr. Chen." The doctor's face was grave as he checked Sandra's vitals. "We're doing everything we can, but her body has sustained significant damage. The next 24 hours will be critical, but you should prepare for the possibility." Rico barely heard the rest. His mind was with Mia in the waiting room, probably clutching that chocolate bar he'd given her this morning. What would happen to her if Sandra didn't make it? After leaving Sandra's room, Rico found himself driving aimlessly through the city streets. The social worker had given him an address, Sunshine House Foster Care. "Just in case," she'd said gently. Now he sat in his truck outside the building, staring at its cheerful yellow paint and white trim. Through the window he could see children playing in what looked like a common room. It seemed nice enough, but his stomach churned at the thought of leaving Mia here. He thought about his own childhood, bouncing between relatives after his mom died. The loneliness, the feeling of not belonging anywhere. He remembered Mia's words from last night. "Sometimes she disappears." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He had no idea how to be a father. His life was a mess of bad decisions and regrets. He lived in a small apartment above a motorcycle repair shop, surrounded by remnants of his troubled past. What could he possibly offer a little girl? But then he remembered how Mia had shared her chocolate with him this morning. How she'd trusted him enough to fall asleep in his arms while crying about her mother. The way she looked at him, like he could fix everything. Rico started the engine. He couldn't leave her here, couldn't add another abandonment to her young life. Even if the DNA test came back negative, even if he had no idea what he was doing, he had to try. He pulled away from the foster home, heading back to the hospital where Mia waited. He didn't know if he could be the father she needed, but he knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't face this alone. Rico fumbled with the spare blankets he'd pulled from his closet, trying to make the worn leather couch look more like a bed. His apartment above Joe's motorcycle repair wasn't much. Just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room cluttered with bike parts and old magazines. The walls were bare except for a few vintage motorcycle posters and a dusty American flag. "I know it's not much," he said, watching Mia take in her surroundings. She stood in the middle of the room, still wearing his oversized jacket over her tattered clothes. Her small fingers traced the edge of a chrome fender that sat on the coffee table. "I like it," she said softly. "It smells like metal and leather. Like you." Rico's throat tightened. He grabbed another pillow from his room and added it to the makeshift bed. "Tomorrow we'll get you some proper clothes and stuff, but this'll have to do for tonight." Mia nodded, her eyes traveling to a photograph on the wall, Rico in his military uniform, standing next to his old unit. "Were you a soldier?" "Yeah, long time ago." He cleared his throat. "Let's get you ready for bed." He found an old t-shirt that would work as a nightgown. It hung down to her ankles when she put it on in the bathroom. Her other clothes lay in a sad pile on the floor. They'd need to be thrown away. "Do you want some water or anything?" Rico asked, as Mia climbed onto the couch. She shook her head, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The couch seemed to swallow her tiny frame. Rico stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do next. He'd never put a kid to bed before. Should he just say goodnight and leave? Was he supposed to check under the bed for monsters or something? "Could you—" Mia's voice was barely a whisper. She paused, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "Could you maybe read me a story?" Rico blinked. "A story?" "Mom used to sometimes, before—" She trailed off, her eyes downcast. "But that was a long time ago." Rico ran a hand through his beard, looking around the apartment desperately. He didn't own any children's books. His bookshelf held mainly repair manuals and a few paperback westerns. "Hold on," he said, grabbing one of the westerns. He sat down in his armchair, the leather creaking under his weight. "This one's about cowboys. That okay?" Mia nodded eagerly, snuggling deeper into the blankets. Rico opened the book, clearing his throat. "The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple," he began, his gruff voice softening as he read. "John Ridge sat tall in his saddle, watching dust devils dance across the empty plain." He glanced up after a few pages. Mia's eyes were heavy, but she fought to keep them open, hanging on every word. Her small hand clutched the blanket, and in the dim light of the apartment, she looked so vulnerable it made his chest ache. As her breathing finally evened out into sleep, Rico lowered the book. What had he gotten himself into? He didn't know the first thing about raising a kid. His apartment wasn't fit for a child. He had no experience, no supplies, no plan. Yet looking at Mia's peaceful face, something stirred in him. A fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. She trusted him completely. This little girl who'd been abandoned so many times before. Rico stared at the open refrigerator, scratching his beard. The shelves held little more than a six-pack of beer, some old takeout containers, and a half-empty bottle of ketchup. He'd meant to go grocery shopping, but the thought had slipped his mind between work at the repair shop and figuring out school enrollment for Mia. "What do you want for breakfast, kid?" he called out, knowing the options were limited. Mia sat at the small kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair. She wore the same clothes from yesterday, now wrinkled from sleep. "Do you have any cereal?" Rico closed the fridge and opened a cabinet. Empty except for some coffee and crackers. "No cereal, sorry." He grabbed his keys from the counter. "We'll grab something on the way to school." At the drive-thru, Mia picked at her breakfast sandwich quietly. Rico noticed her watching other kids walking to school, their backpacks filled with supplies and lunchboxes decorated with cartoon characters. That evening, after work, Rico forgot about dinner until Mia's stomach growled loudly. He ordered pizza, feeling guilty as she ate it without complaint. She needed real food, not just takeout. The next morning, Rico managed to buy some groceries: bread, peanut butter, juice boxes, and whatever else looked kid-friendly. But when he made Mia a sandwich for lunch, he realized he didn't have a proper lunchbox. He stuffed the sandwich in a paper bag, adding a handful of chips. "What kind of snacks do you like?" he asked, trying to make up for his oversight. "Apple slices," Mia said softly. "With cinnamon. Mom used to make them special." Rico added apples to his mental shopping list. But by the time he finished work that day, the thought had vanished among the dozen other things he needed to remember. Days passed, and Rico struggled to keep up. He forgot to wash Mia's clothes, leaving her wearing the same outfit multiple times. The few new clothes he'd bought weren't enough. He burned attempts at home-cooked meals, forgot to check her homework, and missed important school notices that needed signing. One afternoon, Rico packed Mia's lunch as usual. Another peanut butter sandwich, some chips, and a juice box. He dropped her off at school, watching her small figure disappear through the front doors. When he picked her up that afternoon, Mia was quieter than usual. Her teacher, Mrs. Thompson, approached his truck with a concerned look. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "the children share snack time every day at 10. Mia didn't have anything to share again today." Rico's stomach dropped. He hadn't known about snack time. He glanced at Mia, who was buckling her seatbelt, her eyes fixed on her lap. Back home, Rico was heating up leftover pizza when he heard the first sniffle. He turned to see Mia at the table, tears rolling down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, panic rising in his chest. "Everyone else had special snacks," she whispered, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Sarah had apple slices with cinnamon, just like Mom used to make. I told them you'd bring some tomorrow, but—" Her voice broke into a sob. Rico stood frozen, the weight of his failure crushing him. Such a simple thing, apple slices with cinnamon, and he couldn't even manage that. He watched helplessly as Mia's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and for all his strength, all his years of handling tough situations, he had no idea how to fix this one. Rico drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, staring at the small toy store across the street. The neon "Open" sign flickered in the window, casting a warm glow on the wet pavement. He'd passed this store dozens of times before, never giving it a second thought. But now, watching kids and parents stream in and out with bright smiles, it felt like a lifeline. He pulled into a parking spot and cut the engine. Inside his wallet, he counted the few bills he had left from his last paycheck. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and he felt immediately out of place among the colorful displays and cheerful music. "Can I help you find anything?" Sure, kind-faced elderly woman approached him, seemingly unfazed by his intimidating appearance. Rico cleared his throat. "I'm looking for something special. For my daughter." The word "daughter" still felt strange on his tongue. "She's 8. The woman's eyes softened. "Follow me." She led him through aisles of toys until they reached a display of dolls. "These are our most popular ones. Each comes with their own story." Rico's eyes landed on a doll with long, dark hair and a red dress. It reminded him of Mia, especially the gentle expression on its face. He picked it up carefully, his large hands making the doll look even more delicate. "That's a lovely choice," the woman said. "She comes with a little blanket and a storybook." Rico nodded, imagining Mia clutching the doll at night when her nightmares came. Maybe it would help her feel less alone. He checked the price tag and felt his heart sink. It was more than he had. The store owner must have noticed his expression. "We're having a New Year's sale," she said quietly. "Everything's half off today." Rico looked up, surprised. There was no sale sign in the window, but the woman was already writing up a receipt at the reduced price. He fumbled with his wallet, pulling out the crumpled bills. "Would you like it gift-wrapped?" she asked. Rico had never wrapped a present in his life. "Yes, please." He watched as she carefully wrapped the doll in shimmering paper, adding a red bow on top. The final result looked nothing like his rough hands could have managed. Back home, he hid the gift in his room, waiting for the right moment. New Year's Eve arrived, and while the city erupted in celebration outside, Rico and Mia sat in their quiet apartment. She was curled up on the couch, wearing the oversized sweater he'd bought her last week. "Mia," he said, his voice gruff with nervousness. "I got something for you." Her eyes widened as he retrieved the wrapped package. He sat beside her, the couch creaking under his weight, and handed it to her. Mia touched the wrapping paper gently, as if afraid it might disappear. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "Open it." She carefully undid the bow and peeled back the paper. When she saw the doll, her mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. She lifted it from the box with trembling hands. "She's beautiful," Mia whispered, hugging the doll close. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around Rico's neck. "Thank you, thank you." Rico sat very still, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. For the first time since finding her in that alley, he felt like he'd done something right. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be the father she needed. Rico sat at their small kitchen table, watching Mia pick at her macaroni and cheese. The doll he'd given her sat propped in the chair next to her, its plastic eyes reflecting the dim overhead light. Outside, the city hummed with New Year's festivities, but inside their apartment, a heavy silence hung in the air. "You don't have to eat it all," Rico said, noticing her struggle. He wasn't much of a cook, and the boxed dinner was probably overcooked. Mia shook her head. "No, it's good. I'm just—" She pushed a noodle around her plate. "I was thinking about Mom." Rico's hands tightened around his coffee mug. He'd been dreading this conversation, but he knew it had to happen. "You want to talk about her?" Mia nodded slowly, her small fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. "We moved around a lot. Mom would say we were going on adventures, but I knew it was because we couldn't pay rent." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Sometimes we'd stay with her friends, but they weren't very nice people." Rico listened, his heart growing heavier with each word. The little girl before him spoke with a wisdom far beyond her years. "I learned how to make sandwiches when I was 5, she continued. "Mom would forget to make dinner sometimes, so I had to figure it out. I could reach the bread if I stood on a chair." A small smile crossed her face. "I got pretty good at it." "That must have been hard," Rico said, his voice rough with emotion. "I knew when to be quiet, too. When Mom had her bad days, I'd hide in the closet with my stuffed animal. His name was Bruno, but I lost him when we left the Blue House." Mia's eyes grew distant. "We left a lot of places in a hurry." Rico thought about his own cluttered apartment, how it must seem to Mia. It wasn't much, but at least it was stable. "Did you ever stay in one place for long?" "The longest was 3 months at Miss Patterson's house. She was nice. She taught me how to tie my shoes and helped me with my reading." Mia's voice brightened slightly. "But then Mom said we had to go, and we left in the middle of the night." She reached for her new doll, hugging it close. Sometimes Mom would cry and say she was sorry. She'd promise things would get better, that she'd find a good job and we'd have a real home. Mia's lower lip trembled. But it never happened. Rico felt something break inside him. He wanted to reach across the table and hold her, to promise that everything would be different now. But the words stuck in his throat. "I used to pretend we lived in one of those houses with the white fences," Mia said softly. "With a dog and maybe a little garden. Mom would be happy and—" She trailed off, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. "Come on, kiddo," Rico said gently. "Time for bed." He helped her to the couch, which they'd made up with blankets and pillows. Mia curled up with her doll, and within minutes, her breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. Rico stood in the darkness, watching her small form rise and fall with each breath. The weight of her story pressed down on him like a physical thing. Here was this little girl who'd had to grow up too fast, who'd learned to survive when she should have been learning to play. And now she was looking to him for the stability she'd never had. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough scratch of his beard. What did he know about providing stability? His own life had been a series of bad choices and burned bridges. Mia deserved better. A real home, a proper family, someone who knew how to care for her. Not an ex-gang member who could barely keep his own life together. Rico's hands trembled as he stared at the plain white envelope on his kitchen table. The return address showed the medical laboratory's logo, and his name was printed in neat black letters. Inside was the answer he'd been both hoping for and dreading. Through the thin walls of his apartment, he could hear Mia humming to herself in the living room. She was playing with her new doll, lost in her own world of make-believe. The sound made his chest tighten. "Just open it," he muttered to himself, running his fingers through his beard. The envelope felt too light to carry such weight, too flimsy to hold the truth that could change both their lives forever. He glanced at the clock. 7:43 a.m. The morning sun filtered through his dusty kitchen window, casting long shadows across the scratched linoleum floor. He'd been standing there for nearly 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to tear open that envelope. Rico's tattooed hands shook as he finally picked it up. The paper crinkled under his grip, and he forced himself to take slow, deep breaths. He'd faced down rival gang members, survived combat tours. But this simple piece of paper, terrified him more than anything. "Are you okay?" Mia's small voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, her doll clutched against her chest, watching him with those big, trusting eyes. "Yeah, kiddo, just—" He cleared his throat. "Just reading some mail." She nodded, accepting his answer without question, and went back to her play. Rico watched her go, then turned back to the envelope. With one quick motion, he tore it open before he could change his mind. The letter inside was crisp and official looking. His eyes scanned past the medical jargon, searching for the answer. When he found it, the words seemed to leap off the page. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Rico sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the letter trembling in his hands. The rest of the words blurred together as the reality hit him. He was Mia's father. That little girl playing in his living room who'd been abandoned and neglected, who somehow still found the strength to trust and love, she was his daughter. His mind raced back through the years, trying to piece together when, how. Then he remembered Sarah, the woman he'd met at a bar shortly before deploying. They'd spent a weekend together, and he'd shipped out without looking back. He'd never known she was pregnant. Never known he had a daughter out there, growing up alone. Guilt crashed over him like a wave. While he'd been running from his past, drowning his sorrows, his own flesh and blood had been struggling to survive. All those nights Mia had gone. Hungry. All those times she'd hidden in closets. He should have been there. What does it say? Mia was back, standing beside him now. Her small hand touched his arm, and Rico realized his cheeks were wet. He wiped his eyes quickly and looked at her. Really looked at her. He could see it now. The shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. She had his features, softened and made beautiful. It says, his voice cracked. It says, I'm your dad, Mia. Your real dad. Mia's eyes widened, but she didn't seem surprised. Instead, she nodded solemnly, as if confirming something she'd known all along. I thought so, she said quietly. Rico stared at the paper in his hands, then at the little girl, his daughter, standing beside him. The weight of responsibility settled over him like a heavy blanket. He was her father. He was all she had left, and he had no idea how to be what she needed. Mia sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully coloring a bright poster with markers. Rico watched her. From his worn armchair, the DNA results still clutched in his hand like a ticking bomb. She hummed softly as she worked, completely focused on her task. Look! She held up the poster, beaming with pride. It's for the talent show next week. I'm going to sing. The paper was covered in rainbow-colored musical notes and stars. Rico's throat went dry. A talent show meant other parents, teachers, expectations. It meant stepping into a world he knew nothing about. A world where his tattoos and leather jacket would stick out like a warning sign. Miss Thompson says everyone's parents come, Mia continued, her eyes bright with hope. Will you be there? The walls of the apartment seemed to close in. Rico's chest tightened, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead. The reality of being a father, a real father, crashed over him like a tidal wave. School events, parent-teacher conferences, birthday parties, he wasn't made for any of that. I can't, he said roughly, standing up, so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. I've got things to do. But it's really important, Mia pressed, her small voice wavering. I practiced my song for 2 whole weeks. She stood up too, still clutching her poster. Please, I promise you'll like it. I said no! The words came out harder than he meant them to, sharp with fear. I can't do these things, Mia. I'm not that kind of... He couldn't even say the word, father. Mia flinched at his tone, and the poster crumpled slightly in her hands. Her lower lip trembled as she tried to understand. But the paper says you're my daddy, she whispered. And daddies come to talent shows. Rico turned away, unable to bear the hope in her eyes. His hands were shaking. He'd faced down rival gang members without blinking, but this little girl's simple request terrified him more than any street fight. Just leave me alone for a while, okay? He walked to his bedroom, his boots heavy on the floor. Go play, with your doll or something. In the silence that followed, he heard the soft sound of paper being smoothed out, then folded carefully. Through the crack in his door, he watched Mia tuck the poster behind the couch, her movements slow and deliberate. When she straightened up, her face had that closed-off look he recognized from the night he'd found her, the look of a child used to disappointment. She picked up her doll and sat quietly in the corner, no longer humming, no longer smiling. The sight hit Rico like a punch to the gut. He knew he should go back out there, take back his words, promise to attend her show. But fear kept him rooted in place. He was going to fail her, just like he'd failed at everything else in his life. The DNA results might say he was her father, but he had no idea how to be one. Better to pull away now than to let her down even more later. Still, the image of her folding away that bright, hopeful poster haunted him. He'd done that, taken her joy and crumpled it up just like that paper. Just like her mother had done, just like every other adult in her life. The realization made him sick, but he couldn't make himself move. Couldn't make himself be the father she needed. He stayed in his room, listening to the heavy silence beyond his door, hating himself more with each passing minute. A piercing scream shattered the midnight silence. Rico bolted upright in his bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Another cry rang out from the living room, and he was on his feet before his mind could catch up. "Mommy, please don't go!" Mia's voice cracked with terror. Rico stumbled through the darkness, bumping his shin on the coffee table as he rushed to the couch where Mia slept. She thrashed under her blanket, her small face twisted in anguish, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mia," he called out, hovering uncertainly beside her. His hands opened and closed helplessly. He didn't know if he should touch her, wake her, or let the nightmare run its course. "Mia, wake up!" Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. She gasped for air between sobs, her whole body trembling. "Mom?" she whimpered, looking around the dark room in confusion. It's Rico," he said, his voice rough with sleep and worry. "You're okay. You're safe." Mia's face crumpled as reality settled in. She curled into herself, hugging her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. Her sobs grew quieter but more intense, her shoulders shaking with each breath. Rico sat on the edge of the couch, the springs creaking under his weight. "Bad dream?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. Mia nodded, hiccuping. "I saw Mom," she whispered. "She was walking away again, and I couldn't catch up. I kept running and running, but she just got farther away." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Rico's chest ached. He remembered his own nightmares after losing his wife and child. The endless chase, the feeling of helplessness, the raw pain of abandonment. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his large hand on Mia's back. She stiffened for a moment, then suddenly launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. Her tears soaked through his t-shirt, her small fingers clutching the fabric like she was afraid he'd disappear too. Rico froze, caught off guard by her trust. His arms hung awkwardly in the air before slowly, carefully, wrapping around her tiny frame. She felt so fragile against him, like a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. "I miss her," Mia sobbed, "even when she was mad or forgot about me sometimes. She was still my mom." Rico's throat tightened. He thought about the DNA test results, about his earlier failure with the talent show, about all the ways he wasn't equipped to be what Mia needed. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she was just a scared little girl who needed someone to hold her. He adjusted his position on the couch, cradling her more securely against his chest. Her sobs gradually quieted to sniffles, but she didn't let go of his shirt. Rico found himself gently rocking back and forth, the way he remembered his own mother doing when he was very young. "You're safe here, Mia," he whispered into her hair. "I won't let anyone hurt you. I promise." The words came naturally, surprising him with their truth. Something shifted in his chest, a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. For the first time since finding out he was her father, the title felt real, not just a fact proven by science, but a calling written in his heart. The morning sun filtered through Rico's dusty kitchen window, casting long shadows across the small wooden table where he and Mia sat. Steam rose from a bowl of instant oatmeal in front of her, but she just pushed it around with her spoon, her eyes distant and tired from the night before. Rico cleared his throat, his coffee cup warm between his rough hands. The morning. Paper lay unopened beside him, its headlines screaming about the holiday crime rates. but his attention was fixed on the little girl across from him. Her hair was still messy from sleep, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Mia," he started, his voice gentler than usual. "We need to talk about your mom." She looked up at him, her spoon pausing mid-stir. Something in her expression told him she'd been expecting this conversation. Dreading it, maybe. "The doctors at the hospital," Rico continued, choosing his words carefully. "They're doing everything they can for her, but she's very sick. Not just from the drugs, but—" He trailed off, struggling to explain addiction to an 8-year-old. "I know," Mia whispered, her voice small but steady. "Mom gets sick a lot. Sometimes she sleeps for days." Rico's heart clenched at her matter-of-fact tone. No child should understand such things so well. "This time it's different, kiddo. The doctors, they don't know if she's going to get better." Mia's lower lip trembled. She set her spoon down with a soft clink against the bowl. "Is she going to die?" The direct question caught Rico off guard. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But even if she gets better, she won't be able to take care of you for a long time. Maybe not ever again." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. "Where will I go?" "You'll stay here with me," Rico said, surprising himself with how certain he sounded. "At least for now. I know it's not much, and I'm not—" He gestured at himself, at his tattoos and his rough appearance. "I'm not exactly what most kids want in a dad." Mia stared down at her cooling oatmeal, her shoulders hunched. "Mom always said she'd get better," she whispered. "She promised she'd stop taking the bad medicine. She promised she'd be a good mom." Rico watched helplessly as tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Was it because I wasn't good enough?" Mia's voice cracked. "Did I make her sad? Is that why she couldn't stop?" "No," Rico said firmly, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood up. He moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. "Listen to me, Mia. None of this is your fault. Your mom's sickness. It has nothing to do with you being good or bad." She turned to face him, her eyes swimming with tears. "But if I was better, maybe she would have tried harder. Maybe she wouldn't have left me in that alley." Rico felt like someone had punched him in the gut. He reached out and took her small hands in his. "You're a good girl, Mia. The best. What happened to your mom? What she did, that's on her, not you. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and it hurts the people they love. But it's never the kid's fault. Never." Rico pulled up to a small house on the outskirts of town, his motorcycle rumbling to a stop in the gravel driveway. He'd left Mia with Mrs. Peterson, his elderly neighbor, who had practically begged to watch such a sweet child for a few hours. The old brass knocker on Pastor Mike's door felt heavy in his hand. The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a simple sweater and khakis. Pastor Mike's eyes crinkled with recognition. "Rico, it's been what, 5 years?" "6," Rico corrected, shifting uncomfortably on the porch. "Mind if I come in?" The pastor's living room was exactly as Rico remembered it. Worn but comfortable furniture, family photos on the walls, and a small cross above the fireplace. They sat across from each other, Rico's large frame making the armchair seem smaller than it was. "I heard you found a little girl," Pastor Mike said, pouring them both coffee. "Word travels fast in this town." Rico wrapped his tattooed hands around the warm mug. "Her name's Mia. She's—" He took a deep breath. "She's my daughter." Pastor Mike nodded, waiting patiently for Rico to continue. "I keep thinking about who I was back then," Rico said, his voice rough. "The things I did with the angels. The fights, the deals, the people I hurt. He stared into his coffee. I was so angry after Sarah and the baby died. I wanted the world to hurt as much as I did. That was a different man, Pastor Mike said softly. Was it? Rico looked up, his eyes haunted. Because every time Mia looks at me with those trusting eyes, all I can see are the faces of people I let down. Sarah, our unborn child, the guys I served with in the military who counted on me. His hands tightened around the mug. I'm not fit to be anybody's father. Pastor Mike set his coffee down. When you first came to me, fresh out of prison, what did I tell you? That God's grace is bigger than our mistakes. And do you remember what you said to me? Rico's mouth twitched. That grace wasn't enough to bring back the dead. But it was enough to bring you back, Pastor Mike leaned forward. The man who walked into my church that day was drowning in darkness, but you fought your way back. You got clean, you left the angels, you built an honest life. And now there's this little girl. Rico's voice cracked. This innocent kid who needs more than I know how to give. Pastor Mike stood up and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down an old photo album. He opened it to a page showing a younger version of himself with a teenage boy. You remember my Tommy? Rico nodded. Everyone knew about Pastor Mike's son and his battle with addiction. When he was using, I thought I'd failed as a father. But you know what I learned? Being a good father isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up day after day, even when you're scared, even when you don't have all the answers. He closed the album gently. That little girl didn't find you by accident, Rico. Maybe this is your chance at redemption, not because you deserve it, but because love, real, sacrificial love, has a way of healing both the giver and the receiver. Rico wiped roughly at his eyes. I don't want to fail her. Then don't, Pastor Mike said simply. Fight for her like you fought to change your own life. The past doesn't have to define your future, or hers. For the first time since finding Mia, Rico felt something solid beneath his feet, like a foundation he could build on. Fresh snow dusted the playground equipment at Jefferson Park, turning the metal structures into glittering sculptures in the late afternoon light. Rico watched as Mia bounced from foot to foot, her breath coming out in excited little puffs of white vapor. Can you push me on the swings? She asked, her small hand wrapped tightly in his much larger one. Her new winter coat, bright purple and still carrying the store tags he'd forgotten to remove, made her look like a tiny royal against the pristine snow. Sure thing, kiddo. The word felt natural now, where it had once stuck in his throat. He guided her to the swings, carefully brushing the snow off the black rubber seat. Mia hopped on, gripping the chains with mittened hands. Higher, she squealed as he gave her the first gentle push. Rico couldn't help but smile, remembering how Pastor Mike's words had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Each push sent Mia a little higher, her laughter ringing out across the empty park. Look, Rico, I'm flying! She kicked her legs out, trying to pump herself higher. Her woolen hat, decorated with little pom-poms, threatened to fly off with each forward swing. You sure are, sweetheart. The term of endearment surprised him, but it felt right. He caught himself grinning, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. When was the last time he'd smiled like that? Other parents might have worried about their kids going too high, but Rico knew the physics of the swing set. He knew exactly how much force to use, when to hold back, when to give an extra push. It was like his hands had always known how to be gentle. They'd just been waiting for the right moment. Mia's laughter echoed, off the surrounding buildings, pure joy in its simplest form. A few snowflakes began to fall, catching in her dark hair when she tilted her head back. Rico, look at the snow. It's like we're in a snow globe. He slowed the swing gradually, letting her coast to a stop. Mia jumped off and spun around, arms spread wide, trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue. The sight hit Rico square in the chest. This little girl, who'd been through so much, could still find such simple joy in falling snow. They walked to a nearby bench, and Rico brushed off the snow before they sat down. He pulled a thermos from his backpack and poured hot chocolate into the cap, handing it carefully to Mia. "Careful, it's hot," he warned, watching as she blew on the steaming liquid. She took a small sip and smiled up at him, a chocolate mustache decorating her upper lip. "Rico?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. "Are you really my daddy?" He took a deep breath, remembering Pastor Mike's words about showing up, about fighting for what mattered. "Yeah, Mia, I am." She nodded, considering this as she took another sip of hot chocolate. "And you won't leave? Like Mommy did?" Rico turned to face her fully, gently taking the thermos cap from her hands and setting it aside. He looked into her eyes, seeing all the hurt and hope mixed together there. "Mia, I promise you this. I will always be here for you. No matter what happens, you've got me in your corner." She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Rico held her close, feeling her small heart beating against his chest, and knew with absolute certainty that this was where he was meant to be. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Rico's heavy boots squeaked against the polished floor as he made his way to room 412. His hands were shoved deep in his leather jacket pockets, fingers curled into tight fists. Through the window, he could see Sarah, Mia's mother, lying still, beneath a tangle of tubes and wires. The steady beep of monitors provided a haunting rhythm to match his thundering heart. A nurse nodded at him as she exited the room, leaving him alone with the woman who had abandoned their daughter. Rico settled his large frame into the plastic chair beside the bed. Sarah's face was gaunt, her skin sallow against the stark white sheets. Dark circles painted shadows beneath her closed eyes, and her once beautiful features were carved with the harsh lines of addiction. "You should have told me," he muttered, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years, I had a daughter out there, and you never—" He ran a hand through his beard, trying to control the anger that bubbled up inside him. "You let her suffer alone." The monitors beeped steadily, Sarah's chest rising and falling with mechanical precision thanks to the ventilator. Rico leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her face for any resemblance to Mia. He could see it now. The same delicate nose, the curve of her cheekbones. "She's amazing, you know that?" His voice softened. "Smart as a whip. Brave, too. Braver than she should have to be at her age." He swallowed hard. "She still asks about you. Wants to know if you loved her." A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Martinez? Her vitals are dropping. I'm sorry, but—" Rico nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. He turned back to Sarah, reaching out to take her cold hand in his. Despite everything, the anger, the betrayal, the years of silence, she was still Mia's mother. "I remember that night," he said quietly. "At the Devil's Highway bar. You were wearing that red dress, telling stories that made everyone laugh." He closed his eyes, the memory sharp and clear. "Never thought that night would give me the greatest gift of my life." The monitors began to beep more slowly. Sarah's hand felt lighter in his, as if she was already starting to fade away. Rico stood, his massive frame casting a shadow over her bed. "I'm angry at you," he admitted, voice thick with emotion, "for keeping her from me, for leaving her alone. But I promise you this, she'll never be alone again. I'll be the father she deserves. I'll give her everything you couldn't." The The steady rhythm of the heart monitor began to falter. Rico watched as Sarah's chest rose and fell one final time, then stilled. The harsh beep of the flatline cut through the room like a knife. "Rest easy," he whispered, gently laying her hand back on the bed. "I've got her now. I'll take care of our little girl." As the medical team rushed in, Rico stepped back, his promise echoing in his mind. For Mia's sake, he would honor Sarah's memory, not the woman who had abandoned their daughter, but the young mother who must have loved her child, even if she couldn't show it. He would make sure Mia knew that love every single day. Rico stood in the middle of his cluttered apartment, hands on his hips, surveying the chaos around him. Empty beer bottles lined the windowsill. Old newspapers were scattered across the coffee table, and a layer of dust covered everything. This wasn't a home for a little girl. This was a cave where a lonely man had been hiding from the world. "Time to clean house," he muttered, grabbing a large black trash bag from under the sink. He started with the obvious stuff: the bottles, the newspapers, the takeout containers that had piled up. His movements were methodical, like when he used to clean his service weapon in the military. Each piece of trash that went into the bag felt like letting go of his old life. In the corner, he found Mia's backpack propped against the wall, her small coat hanging from a nail he'd hammered in as a temporary solution. That wouldn't do. He grabbed his keys and headed to the hardware store down the street. 2 hours later, he was installing proper coat hooks at Mia's height. He'd picked ones shaped like butterflies, remembering how she'd pointed at a butterfly mural on their walk to school yesterday. Next came a shoe rack, assembled with careful attention to the instructions, something the old Rico would never have bothered with. The living room slowly transformed. He moved his worn leather recliner to make space for a small desk where Mia could do her homework. A bright reading lamp replaced the harsh overhead light. On the walls, he hung framed pictures he'd taken of Mia at the park, her smile brightening the room more than any light could. In the kitchen, he cleared out the cupboards, replacing stale chips and expired cans with proper groceries. He'd asked other parents at Mia's school what kids her age liked to eat. Now the fridge held fresh fruit, milk, and ingredients for actual meals. He'd even bought those little juice boxes she'd been eyeing at the store. The bathroom got a complete overhaul. Out went his single bar of soap and ratty towel, replaced by colorful bath items and a shower curtain decorated with sea creatures. He arranged her toothbrush in a special holder shaped like a dolphin, positioning it right next to his own. The biggest change was the spare room. It had been his storage space, filled with boxes of memories he'd rather forget. Now, after hours of work, it was beginning to look like a proper bedroom. The walls, once gray and bare, were now a soft yellow. He'd assembled a real bed, no more sleeping on the couch for Mia, and covered it with the butterfly-patterned bedding she'd picked out at the store. A bookshelf held both her school books and some storybooks he'd bought, remembering how much she loved being read to at bedtime. On the dresser, he carefully arranged the doll he'd given her for Christmas, along with a few new stuffed animals to keep it company. Rico stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and furniture polish instead of stale beer and loneliness. Everything was ready. The snacks in the kitchen, her room, prepared, even a welcome mat by the front door. He glanced at his watch. The school bus would be dropping her off any minute now. Right on cue, he heard quick footsteps in the hallway. The door burst open, and Mia rushed in, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes growing wide as she took in the transformed apartment. Rico pulled his old pickup truck into the Christmas Tree Farm's gravel parking lot. The morning sun sparkled off fresh snow, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. He glanced at Mia in the passenger seat, bundled up in her new winter coat and the rainbow scarf they'd bought together last week. "Ready to pick out our tree?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. Mia's eyes lit up as she nodded eagerly. "I've never had a real Christmas tree before," she said softly, pressing her small nose against the window. Rico's heart squeezed at her words. He climbed out and walked around to help her down from the high seat. Her boots crunched in the snow as she jumped down, and she immediately grabbed his large, calloused hand with her mittened one. They walked past rows of pre-cut trees leaning against wooden racks, but Rico steered them toward the path that led into the farm proper. "We're going to cut down our own," he explained. "That way we know it's fresh." A cheerful woman in a red vest greeted them at the entrance, handing them a bow saw and a measuring tape. "The best trees are up on the hill," she said, pointing to a snowy slope dotted with evergreens. "And we've got free hot cocoa in the warming hut when you're done." Mia tugged at Rico's hand, practically bouncing with excitement. They trudged through the snow, examining tree after tree. Rico showed her how to check if a tree was healthy by gently pulling on the needles. If they fell off easily, the tree was too dry. "How about this one?" Mia asked, stopping in front of a perfectly shaped blue spruce. Rico stepped back to assess it. "Good eye, kiddo. Let's measure it." He lifted her up so she could hold the tape measure against the top. 7 feet. That'll fit perfect in our living room." As Rico got down on his knees in the snow to saw through the trunk, Mia danced around the tree, singing a Christmas carol she'd learned at school. Her voice, clear and sweet, floated through the crisp winter air. "Timber!" Rico called softly as the tree began to tip. Mia clapped as it fell with a soft thump into the snow. They dragged the tree together to the baling station, where workers wrapped it in netting. While they waited, Rico led Mia to the warming hut. Inside, the pot-bellied stove radiated heat, and the air smelled of chocolate and cinnamon. Rico handed Mia a steaming cup of hot cocoa, complete with mini marshmallows floating on top. She cupped it carefully in both hands, her cheeks pink from the cold and excitement. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him with those big, trusting eyes that never failed to melt his heart. They sat together on a wooden bench, sipping their cocoa and watching other families come and go. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Mia's contented sighs. After helping Rico secure the tree to the roof of the truck, Mia climbed into her seat. As they pulled onto the road heading home, she turned to him with a smile that lit up her whole face. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," she said simply. Rico felt something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with hot cocoa. He reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, realizing that for the first time, he was starting to feel like the father he'd always wanted to be. Rico shifted uncomfortably in the small plastic chair, tugging at his collar. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with excited chatter as parents filed in with cameras and smartphones ready. He felt out of place among the other parents in their neat clothes, aware of his tattoos, peeking out from under his dress shirt. The nicest one he owned. A mother 2 rows ahead turned and gave him a wary glance. Rico was used to those looks, but tonight they bothered him more than usual. He wanted everything to be perfect for Mia. He'd even trimmed his beard and pulled his long hair back into a neat ponytail. The lights dimmed, and the principal stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone. Rico barely heard her words, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew how much courage it had taken for Mia to sign up for this show. She'd practiced for weeks in their living room, her small voice growing stronger each day. One by one, kids performed their acts, magic tricks, dance routines, and piano recitals. Rico clapped politely, but his eyes kept drifting to the side of the stage where he knew Mia was waiting. Finally, her name was called. Next up, Mia Torres, performing You Are My Sunshine. Rico's breath caught in his throat as Mia walked onto the stage. She wore the new dress they'd picked out together, pale blue with tiny flowers. Her dark hair was braided neatly, something her teacher had helped with since Rico's attempts at hairstyling were still a work in progress. Mia stepped up to the microphone, looking tiny under the bright lights. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found Rico. He gave her a small nod, and what he hoped was an encouraging smile. She took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone, her voice clear but trembling slightly. "I'm singing this song for my mom, who's in heaven now, and for my dad, who found me when I needed him most." Rico's vision blurred with unexpected tears. He blinked them away quickly as the first notes of the piano accompaniment filled the auditorium. Mia's voice started soft, but grew stronger with each word. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The familiar melody carried memories of her mother, but also spoke of new beginnings. Rico watched, his chest tight with emotion, as his daughter stood brave and tall on that stage, singing her heart out. When she reached the line, "Please don't take my sunshine away," her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. Rico saw a tear roll down her cheek, but she kept singing, stronger than before. The audience sat in respectful silence, many wiping away tears of their own. As Mia sang the final note, the auditorium erupted in applause. Rico stood up, not caring that his own cheeks were wet, and clapped until his hands hurt. Mia beamed under the stage lights, her smile brighter than Rico had ever seen it. She gave a small curtsy, just like she'd practiced at home, then hurried off the stage. A few minutes later, as the show ended and parents began gathering their children, Mia came running through the crowd. Her face was flushed with excitement, and her eyes sparkled. She launched herself into Rico's arms, and he caught her, lifting her up in a tight hug. "You were amazing, kiddo," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Mia pulled back just enough to look at his face, her small hands on his shoulders. "I'm so proud you're my daddy," she said softly. "Thank you for staying." The January wind whistled through the bare trees as Rico and Mia walked up the steps to the therapist's office. Mia's small hand clutched his tightly, her other arm wrapped around the stuffed bear she'd gotten for Christmas. The waiting room was warm and painted in soft colors, with children's books scattered on low tables. "You okay, kiddo?" Rico asked, settling into one of the chairs. His leather jacket creaked as he moved. Mia nodded but pressed closer to his side. "Will the doctor help us feel better?" "That's the plan." Rico ran a hand through his beard, still getting used to how neat it looked after his recent trim. "Dr. Sarah's going to help us talk about stuff that's hard to say sometimes." The door opened, and a woman with kind eyes and curly gray hair stepped out. "Rico and Mia, I'm Dr. Sarah. Would you like to come in?" The therapy room had big windows that let in streams of winter sunlight. Stuffed animals and art supplies lined the shelves, and there was a small sandbox in the corner. Mia's eyes lit up at the sight. "Mia, why don't you draw us a picture while I talk to your dad for a minute?" Dr. Sarah suggested, gesturing to a child-sized table with art supplies. As Mia settled in with some crayons, Rico shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He wasn't used to opening up to strangers, but when Dr. Sarah asked about their story, he found himself talking about finding Mia in the alley, about the DNA test, about his fears of failing as a father. "It sounds like you both have been through a lot," Dr. Sarah said gently. "Mia, would you like to share your drawing with us?" Mia held up her paper. She'd drawn 3 figures, herself, Rico, and a woman with a halo who Rico knew must be her mother. "That's our family," she said quietly. "Even though Mommy's in heaven now." Rico felt his throat tighten. Dr. Sarah helped them talk about grief, about fear, about learning to trust. She showed them exercises they could do together when feelings got too big to handle. In the weeks that followed, Rico noticed small changes. Mia's nightmares became less frequent. She started talking more about her feelings instead of bottling them up. And Rico found himself opening up too, sharing stories about his own childhood that he'd never told anyone. One sunny afternoon in early February, Rico stood at the kitchen window, washing dishes. Outside, Mia was building a snowman in their small backyard. She'd insisted on using his old bandana as a scarf for it, and the sight made him smile. The therapy sessions had taught him to recognize these moments of peace when they came. He watched as Mia carefully placed stones in a smile on the snowman's face, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes sparkled with joy. For the first time since finding her in that alley, Rico felt truly settled. The constant worry that he wasn't good enough, that he would somehow mess everything up, had begun to fade. In its place was something new, a quiet confidence that they would figure things out together. Mia looked up and caught him watching. She waved excitedly, gesturing for him to come outside and see her creation. Rico dried his hands, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. The future stretched out before them, no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. The living room glowed with the soft light of their Christmas tree, now adorned with a mix of store-bought ornaments and Mia's handmade creations. Outside, snow fell gently, coating their small backyard in white. Rico sat on the worn couch, nervously turning the small wrapped box in his hands, while Mia finished her breakfast in the kitchen. A year had passed since that fateful Christmas Eve, when he'd found her in the alley. The changes in both their lives still amazed him. Their apartment, once sparse and unwelcoming, now felt like a real home. Children's drawings covered the fridge, and colorful throw pillows brightened the furniture. "Can I open my presents now?" Mia called from the kitchen, her voice eager. At 9 years old, she'd grown taller, and her face had lost some of its earlier wariness. Regular meals and love had worked wonders. Rico cleared his throat. "Come here, kiddo. I've got something special for you first." Mia bounded into the living room, her dark hair bouncing in messy pigtails. She wore the Christmas sweater they'd picked out together, decorated with prancing reindeer. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the small box in Rico's hands. "Before you open this," Rico said, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to know that it's okay to feel sad sometimes, even on happy days." Mia nodded solemnly, settling next to him on the couch. She'd learned a lot about feelings in their therapy sessions over the past year. Rico handed her the box, wrapped in silver paper with tiny snowflakes. His hands, still calloused from years of hard living, trembled slightly. He'd spent weeks planning this moment, working with a local jeweler to get everything just right. Mia carefully unwrapped the paper, revealing a velvet box. Inside lay a silver heart-shaped locket on a delicate chain. The metal caught the Christmas tree lights, sending tiny sparkles across her face. "Open it," Rico whispered. With careful fingers, Mia worked the tiny clasp. The locket sprang open, revealing 2 photos. On one side was a picture of her mother, young, healthy, and smiling, before the addiction had taken hold. Rico had found it in old social media posts and had it restored. On the other side was a recent photo of Rico and Mia at the park, both grinning at the camera. Mia's fingers traced her mother's face. "She looks so happy," she whispered, her voice catching. She loved you very much, Rico said, putting his arm around her shoulders. Even when she couldn't show it right. I want you to have a way to keep her close to your heart, along with our new family. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she stared at the photos. Her lower lip trembled, and Rico recognized the mix of joy and sorrow on her face, emotions they'd learned to navigate together over the past year. Will you help me put it on? She asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Rico took the locket and gently fastened it around her neck. The silver heart settled just below her collarbone, catching the light as she breathed. Thank you, Daddy, Mia whispered, throwing her arms around his neck. Her tears dampened his shirt, but Rico didn't mind. He held her close, feeling the weight of the moment. Rico sat on their worn couch, watching as Mia arranged a plate of cookies she'd insisted on baking for their New Year's Eve celebration. The chocolate chip cookies were slightly burnt on the edges, but her proud smile made them look like masterpieces from a fancy bakery. Through their living room window, distant pops and crackles of early fireworks filled the night sky. The city was coming alive with celebration, and for once, Rico didn't feel the usual emptiness that holidays brought. Their small Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights twinkling softly, making the room feel cozy and warm. Mia touched the locket around her neck. She hadn't taken it off since Christmas morning, and climbed onto the couch next to Rico. She snuggled close, pulling their shared blanket up to her chin. Remember when we first met? She asked, her voice soft and thoughtful. In that alley? Rico's heart tightened at the memory. Yeah, kiddo. I remember every second. I was so scared, she admitted, playing with the fringe of the blanket. But when I saw you, something told me you were different. Like maybe you needed someone too. Rico cleared his throat, fighting back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. He looked down at his tattooed arms, remembering how he'd wrapped her in his leather jacket that night. I didn't know it then, but I needed you more than anything. Another firework burst outside, painting their walls in momentary gold and red. Mia jumped slightly at the sound, then giggled. This year was the best year ever, she declared, reaching for a cookie. Even though some parts were really hard. Rico nodded, thinking about the difficult moments, saying goodbye to her mother, the challenging therapy sessions, the nights when Mia's nightmares seemed unstoppable. But he also remembered the victories. Mia's first A on a math test, their successful camping trip, the day she finally felt comfortable enough to call him Daddy, without hesitation. You know what my favorite part was? Mia asked, crumbs falling onto the blanket. What's that? Learning that family isn't just about being born together. It's about choosing each other, every single day. Rico blinked hard, amazed at her wisdom. The therapist had said something similar months ago, but hearing it from Mia made it real in a way nothing else could. More fireworks exploded outside, closer now, lighting up their faces. Mia checked the clock on the wall, 11:57 p.m. Almost time? She exclaimed, bouncing slightly on the cushions. Rico grabbed their cups of hot chocolate from the coffee table, handing one to Mia. They had developed this little tradition over the past year, hot chocolate for all their important moments. Tonight, he'd even added extra marshmallows. As the minutes ticked by, they watched the sky light up with increasingly frequent bursts of color. The noise of the city grew louder, cheering, music, and the persistent pop of fireworks creating a symphony of celebration. 10 seconds, Mia announced, setting down her mug and grabbing Rico's hand. Together they counted down, their voices joining the chorus of the city. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The sky erupted in a spectacular display of light and color. Cheers erupted from nearby apartments, and car horns honked in celebration. Rico squeezed Mia's small hand in his and leaned close to her ear. "Happy New Year, my little girl," he whispered. Mia beamed up at him, her face glowing with happiness in the light of the fireworks. They sat together, hands clasped, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.